Welcome to the Synthesis of Yoga, the book that changed my life. We are going through the part 1, the Yoga of Divine Works, chapter 4, the sacrifice, the triune path, and the Lord of the sacrifice. There is a link to this chapter in the description. For those who are not familiar with this podcast, please click the link, look at the text, because we will be reading through line by line and exploring the meanings. In our last episode, Aurobindo gave us an overview of the 3 fundamental realizations. One was experiencing the self as yourself and the world exists in your vast, liberated self. That happens when you go subjectively inward, discovering the self within and merging of the ego, dissolving of the ego into the universal larger self. And in that experience, the world appears to be existing in you, in yourself. The second fundamental realization is looking outward into the world of forms and seeing through all that to experience the one self behind everything, in which your separate self dissolves. And the entire world exists in that self. That's the second. Third is an extreme experience where you transcend the world of forms into an unknowable. And as you deepen into that experience, even the world actually appears to be an illusion. The world of forms lose its significance. It becomes empty, void of sense. There, the nirvana, dissolution, the worldview of Maya, all that comes into picture. However, Aurobindo also hinted at other realizations that are possible, especially when you settle in that unknowable. Eventually, a greater realization dawns and various riches, infinite riches of the divine truth begins to reveal. But that is when you are looking at an integral yoga and an integral perfection and a transformation. So that was the gist of the previous episode. Now let's begin the latest one. This is episode number 61. We are starting with paragraph 19. If a departure from the world and its activities, a supreme release and quietude were the sole aim of the seeker, the 3 great fundamental realizations would be sufficient for the fulfillment of his spiritual life. Many schools of yoga considers this departure from the world, ending of the cycle of rebirth and dissolving into the timeless existence, to be the ultimate purpose of spiritual life. If that is the purpose, then any of the 3 fundamental realizations or all 3 will be sufficient in itself. We don't have to look for any further. It's an end in itself. Concentrated in them alone, he would suffer all other divine or mundane knowledge to fall away from him and himself unencumbered depart into the eternal silence. So having found that fundamental realization and deeply settling in that, where you have dissolved, in that state, all the mundane knowledge about the world or even the divine knowledge, you would let all that to fall away, because very purpose of spiritual life is attained that dissolution, dissolving into the nirvana you have arrived at. Therefore, you can let them all fall away. And you can depart into the eternal silence. Let us read this line once again in its full length. If a departure from the world and its activities, a supreme release and quietude were the sole aim of the seeker, the three great fundamental realizations would be sufficient for the fulfillment of his spiritual life. Concentrated in them alone, he could suffer all other divine or mundane knowledge to fall away from him and himself unencumbered depart into the eternal silence. So you're shedding everything, finally, eventually shedding the body so that you can dissolve into that pure self that was never born, never died, eternal, uncreated self. And this whole world of forms can fall away. It has no meaning, no purpose. You have accomplished liberation. But he has to take account of the world and its activities, learn what divine truth there may be behind them, and reconcile that apparent opposition between the divine truth and the manifest creation, which is the starting point of most spiritual experience. So now we are looking at, if one is to take account of the world and its activities, learn what divine truth there may be behind them, and reconcile that apparent opposition. What is the apparent opposition? Like on one side, there is this uncreated self beyond all the forms, beyond time and space. Then there is this manifest multiplicity. Between them, there is no link. It seems to be a cinematographic projection, something that has no essential value, a transient world of forms. So these two, there is an opposition between them, especially from this first experience, first entry into that spiritual experience. One of the fundamental realizations, when it dawns upon you, you will encounter this apparent opposition between that eternal self and this manifest world. You cannot reconcile them other than concluding that this world of manifest multiplicity is an illusion, a transient, meaningless parade of forms. But he has to take account of the world and its activities, learn what divine truth there may be behind them, and reconcile that apparent opposition between the divine truth and manifest creation, which is the starting point of most spiritual experience. So the integral seeker, the seeker of integral yoga, this is one fundamental challenge, to discover the divine truth behind this manifestation. What is the reason for this manifestation? Is it to only escape from it? Discover that it was an illusion? Is that the purpose of Earth, the whole evolution on Earth? These questions are foundational to integral yoga. Here, on each line of approach he can take, he is confronted with a constant duality, a separation between two terms of existence that seems to be opposites, and their opposition to be the very root of the riddle of the universe. Of these three fundamental realizations, whichever be the route that you take, you will encounter this fundamental duality. On one side is this self, other side the manifest world. He is confronted with the constant duality, capital D, duality. Sri Aurobindo will be now taking us into that journey of what is this duality. On one side, manifest world, other side, the self. A separation between two terms of existence that seem to be opposites, and their opposition to be the very root of the riddle of the universe. There is this manifest world, it's a riddle, and we don't know its significance, its meaning. And this very opposition seems to be opposites, and their opposition to be the very root of the riddle of the universe. This very apparent opposition makes the world a riddle. We are not able to explain why the world created in the first place. If the entire purpose of this world is to recognize that it was an illusion and to get back into the pure self. That riddle, why this has been created, it is not logically conceivable. It doesn't sound reasonable to imagine that the divine consciousness, by error, created this world, this phantom world of transient forms, only to realize that it was an illusion, only to see that it is nothing but suffering. It makes no sense. There is a riddle here. So here, on each line of approach that he can take, he is confronted with a constant duality, a separation between two terms of existence that seem to be opposites, and their opposition to be the very root of the riddle of the universe. Later, he may and does discover that these are the two poles of one being. So, if one is willing to explore beyond liberation, then he may and does discover that these are the two poles of one being. So, self is one, but the self has two poles. It is one being having two poles. Imagine it to be like North Pole and South Pole of a magnet. So connected by two simultaneous currents of energy. So here is a very important structural picture Sri Aurobindo is giving. Remember, this is the vision of a yogi who has realized all three fundamental realizations and reconciled the oppositions between the two, seeing the totality of, on one side, one pole of the being that is timeless, transcendent, eternal. On the other side, the manifest world. And between these two, he is saying two simultaneous currents of energy. These two poles are connected by two simultaneous currents of energy, like a battery or a magnet. There is a continuous current of energy moving between these two poles. Keep this in mind. This is a very important structural key to integral yoga. Not only integral yoga, the whole process of manifestation, the whole process of evolution, these two simultaneous currents that are flowing between the two poles of one being. These are the two poles of one being, connected by two simultaneous currents of energy, negative and positive, in relation to each other. They are negative and positive in relation to each other. Their interaction, the very condition for the manifestation of what is within the being. So there is this eternal being. Within that being, there is infinite potentiality. And that potentiality manifests as this complex world of forms, of multiplicity. The very condition of that manifestation is the flow of this currents, two currents, negative and positive, simultaneous currents. This is the underlying process behind manifestation. Their interaction, the very condition for the manifestation of what is within the being. Their reunion, the appointed means, their reunion, these two poles have to reunite. The appointed means for the reconciliation of life's discords and for the discovery of the integral truth of which he is the seeker. Seeker of integral yoga is looking for the integral truth, a truth that reconciles the riddle of the world, its very existence, in relationship with the transcendent self. These are the two poles of one being. There is this two currents connecting the two. These two poles, their union is really the means for the reconciliation of life's discords. Our life on earth is full of discords, full of suffering, full of ignorance, full of pain, bound by death. Now, all these are to be reconciled. And if we are to discover the very evolutionary purpose on earth, then discovering these two currents and uniting the two poles of our being will be the means, appointed means for the reconciliation of life's discords and for the discovery of the integral truth of which he is the seeker. So let's read this line once again. Very, very powerful central image. If you can hold this in your mind for all the future explorations, imagine it to be like a battery, a torus of energy, two poles of one being. I have visualized this in this Evolution Fast Forward series of videos. You can watch these videos and you can see the two poles of one being. In the part 2, you will find that. Two poles of one being, two simultaneous currents flowing between the two, which is a condition for the manifestation and also the means, appointed means of the reconciliation between these two worlds. Let us read that full line. Later, he may and does discover that these are the two poles of one being, connected by two simultaneous currents of energy, negative and positive, in relation to each other. Their interaction, the very condition for the manifestation of what is within the being. Their reunion, the appointed means for the reconciliation of life's discords and for the discovery of the integral truth of which he is the seeker. We are the seekers of that integral truth. For on one side, he is aware of this self everywhere, self with capital S, this everlasting spirit substance, Brahman, the eternal. The same self-existence here in time behind each appearance he sees or senses, and timeless beyond the universe. So it is this one self all permeating. It is here behind all the forms. As well, it transcends the universe. It is timeless. Simultaneously, it is transcendent and universal behind all the forms. So this is first thing, you become aware. So on one side, he is aware of this self everywhere, this everlasting spirit substance, everlasting. It is deathless. Even within an individual, when we dive deeper within us, we will discover that which is deathless, immortal. Then there is this mortal side of our substance, our bodily substance, our vital substance, mental substance, all that dissolves. But there is this everlasting spirit substance deep within or behind all forms. So this everlasting spirit substance, which is also referred to as the Brahman, the eternal, the same self-existence here in time, behind each appearance he sees or senses, and timeless beyond the universe. So this uncreated self, everlasting spirit substance, this Brahman, is beyond time and space, as well as behind the appearances of all the forms. He has this strong, overpowering experience of a self that is neither our limited ego nor our mind, life, or body. Worldwide, but not outwardly phenomenal. Yet, to some spirit sense in him, more concrete than any form or phenomenon. Universal, yet not dependent for its being on anything in the universe or on the whole totality of the universe. If all this were to disappear, its extinction would make no difference to this eternal of his constant intimate experience. So this overpowering experience, and this experience doesn't come through our senses. There is something in us that can know this, and it is not through our outward senses that we get to know. This strong, overpowering experience of a self that is neither our limited ego nor our mind, life, or body. Usually, our mind gives us our sense of self, and then we are discovering something that is none of this, not mind, not life, not body, not ego. It is something else. It's worldwide, but not outwardly phenomenal. Something that is worldwide, but not outwardly phenomenal. Yet to some spirit sense in him, spirit sense. So the seeker has a deeper inner faculty. He is referring to that as spirit sense in him, more concrete than any form or phenomenon. So that spiritual experience is something far more substantial than this outer world of forms. Universal, yet not dependent for its being on anything in the universe. So that's another characteristic, that this self doesn't depend on the whole universe it has created. It is independent of the universe. It has no dependency on the whole totality of the universe. If all this were to disappear, its extinction would make no difference to its eternal of this constant intimate experience. So in Indian Puranic traditions, we read about the pralaya, the dissolution. Even the whole worlds dissolve. It makes no difference to the Brahman. It exists eternally, uncreated. The worlds are created, they dissolve, go away. Doesn't matter. It doesn't affect this self of all things, which is eternal. So the seeker's intimate experience of this self is something very, very concrete, not in the outer phenomenal world sense. Some spirit sense within us can know it much deeply, intimately. He has this strong, overpowering experience of a self that is neither our limited ego nor our mind, life, or body. Worldwide, but not outwardly phenomenal. Yet, to some spirit sense in him, more concrete than any form or phenomenon. Universal, yet not a dependent for its being on anything in the universe or on the whole totality of the universe. If all this were to disappear, its extinction would make no difference to this eternal of his constant, intimate experience. He is sure of an inexpressible self existence, which is the essence of himself and all things. So that certitude is there. He is sure. We have this absolute, direct, experiential certitude. He is sure of an inexpressible self-existence. Inexpressible. You cannot express it. All our attempt to express it falls short. It is inexpressible self-existence, which is the essence of himself and all things. He is intimately aware of an essential consciousness. Essential consciousness, here consciousness, C is capital. Essential consciousness, of which thinking mind and life sense and body sense are only partial and diminished figures. So from this essential consciousness comes our thinking mind, life sense, and body sense, and these are only partial and diminished figures. A consciousness with an illimitable force in it. Illimitable force. Here he has brought in capital F. Illimitable force. So there is this consciousness is having an illimitable force in it, of which all energies are the outcome. The energies of the world, whether it is our ecosystem, our nature bursting with all her thunder and lightning and seasons and variations and flows of air currents and storms, everything, whether we look beyond outer forms into the electricity and all the thermal energy and the entire energies of the physical world, everything comes from that fundamental consciousness, the foundational being. A consciousness with an illimitable force in it, of which all energies are the outcome, but which is yet not explained or accounted for by the sum or power or nature of all these energies together. So if we put together all the energies of the universe, it will not add up to explain this eternal self. Not explained or accounted for by the sum or power or nature of all these energies together. He feels he lives in an inalienable self-existent bliss, which is not this lesser transient joy or happiness or pleasure. So there is this experience of inalienable bliss. It has no dependency on anything outwardly happening. It is self-existent. That's the fundamental truth of our spiritual deepest depth, spiritual very substance. Sat Chit Ananda, where there is a self-existent bliss of our being to which we can arrive at. And it is nothing like our transient joy or happiness or pleasure which we experience in our outer life. The spirit within has this absolute self-existent joy, fundamentally different, unlike this transient joy or happiness or pleasure we have. Let's read this line once again. He is sure of an inexpressible self-existence, which is the essence of himself and all things. He is intimately aware of an essential consciousness, of which thinking mind and life sense and body sense are only partial and diminished figures. A consciousness with an illimitable force in it, of which all energies are the outcome, but which is yet not explained or accounted for by the sum or power or nature of all these energies together. He feels he lives in an inalienable self-existent bliss, which is not this lesser transient joy or happiness or pleasure. So everything comes out of it, but all that is in existence, when you put together, that really doesn't explain this self that is self-existent. It has a self-existent bliss, very different. So this powerful experience is something very rare, and yet for an integral seeker is the starting point. A changeless, imperishable infinity. A changeless, imperishable infinity. That's one of the character. It doesn't change. It's immutable. Aksharam. Imperishable. Infinity. Changeless, imperishable infinity. A timeless eternity. Timeless eternity. A self-awareness which is not this receptive and reactive or tentacular mental consciousness. Tentacular mental consciousness. Our mental consciousness reaching out through the senses. They are really like tentacles. They reach out to the objects of sensation and, like tentacles, cling to them, get entangled with them. That's the very nature of our outer mental consciousness. And behind it is also our receptive and reactive energies. So these are our common experiences. When we look at ourselves, we see on one hand the mind and senses getting entangled in the world of forms. It cannot disentangle. And right behind it, there is this energies that are reacting to this encounters with the outer world. And on one hand, it is receiving, and then it is reacting upon it. So through the senses, the world is pouring into us. So there is a reception. Then upon that which is received, there is a reaction to it. And an entanglement, like a tentacle. So we get bundled up with our limited set of experiences. So a self-awareness which is not this receptive, reactive, or tentacular mental consciousness. So there is a self-awareness that can stand back from this reactive, receptive mental consciousness, but is behind and above it and present too below it, even in what we call inconscience. So this changeless, imperishable infinity is timeless eternity, a self-awareness which is independent of all this. It is always behind, it is above, it is below, and even in what we call inconscience. Inconscience is a term Sri Aurobindo uses to represent the lowest end where there is no awareness at all, absolute sleep. We can say in physics, the absolute end of, let's say, absolute zero, minus 273. I don't recall exactly what is the number. When the temperature goes to the absolute zero, everything collapses. That's like the inconscience, where there is zero awareness, absolute sleep of things. A oneness in which there is no possibility of any other existence are the fourfold character of this settled experience. So what are this fourfold character? A changeless, imperishable infinity, that is one character. It is changeless, it's imperishable, it's infinite. One character. A timeless eternity, that's a second character. Third character is a self-awareness. Now, this self-awareness is independent of the receptive, reactive, tentacular mental consciousness. And this self-awareness stands behind it, stands above it, stands below it, all the way to the inconscience. So a self-awareness, that's a third character, and a oneness in which there is no possibility of any other existence are the fourfold character of this settled experience. We may have a glimpse, but may not settle in it. But it's very important for the yogin not only to glimpse, first of all, going beyond the philosophical ideas to arrive at experiential glimpse, then to settle there. Once you settle there, you will discover this fourfold character. A oneness where there is no possibility of any other existence. Absolute oneness. A self-awareness which is behind, above, below. It covers the entire spectrum of existence. A timeless eternity, a changeless, imperishable infinity. Yet, this eternal self-existence is seen by him also as a conscious time spirit. A conscious time spirit, capital T, capital S, with a hyphen connecting the two. A conscious time spirit, bearing the stream of happenings, a self-extended spiritual space containing all things and beings, a spirit substance which is the very form and material of all that seems non-spiritual, temporary, and finite. So, the other picture, the dynamic picture, is now brought forth. This eternal self-existence is seen by him also as a conscious time spirit bearing the stream of happenings. Yet, this eternal self-existence is seen by him also as a conscious time spirit bearing the stream of happenings. Stream of happenings. Time spirit. It is the time, the field in which the stream of events are happening. And there is the spirit presiding over that flow of things happening in time. So a conscious time spirit bearing the stream of happenings, a self-extended spiritual space, self-extended spiritual space. When we look at space, we don't see it as an extension of ourselves. But from this voice of our pure self, it is a self-extended spiritual space containing all things and beings. It is in that space everything is contained, containing all things and beings. A spirit substance, here again, hyphen connects spirit capital S, substance capital S. Spirit substance, which is the very form and material of all that seems non-spiritual, temporary, and finite. The manifest world is full of things that are finite, that are temporary. We may also say them as non-spiritual. The whole material world is seen as non-spiritual. In fact, behind all that is this spirit substance, which is the very form and material of all that seems non-spiritual, temporary, and finite. So there is a spirit substance behind it. And there is a time spirit which is bearing the streams of happening. So time spirit and spirit substance. For all that is transitory, temporal, spatial, bounded, is yet felt by him to be in its substance and energy and power, no other than the one, the eternal, the infinite. All that is transitory, temporal, spatial, bounded. These are descriptions that perfectly explains the nature of our material existence. It is transitory. Everything in our material nature takes birth, eventually fade away. They're temporal. They are spatial. They occupy space and they exist in space, and they are bounded, limited. For all that is transitory, temporal, spatial, bounded, is yet felt by him to be its substance, that spirit substance, and energy and power, no other than the one, the eternal, the infinite. So this material manifest world would reveal itself to be none other than the one, the eternal, the infinite. This whole spirit substance, the time spirits presiding over the flow of events, all that will be embraced in that experience as one deepens into this realization. And yet, there is not only in him or before him, in him or before him. In him means one's own self has dissolved into that greater self. Before him means you have dissolved into the self that is behind all things. All things are in the self. In other experience, all things are in oneself. So there is not only in him or before him this eternal self-aware existence, this spiritual consciousness, this infinity of self-illumined force, this timeless and endless beatitude, this infinity of self-illumined force. A force that is in motion, it is self-illumined. Beautiful expression. Infinity of self-illumined force. This timeless and endless beatitude, this grace that one experiences in that timeless, endless beatitude. There is too constant also to his experience this universe in a measurable space and time, some kind perhaps of boundless finite. Boundless finite. It's a very interesting expression. Finite, which is boundless. It's like in fractal geometry, we can see that things look finite, but when you zoom in, it's infinity in itself. So it's like a boundless finite. And in it, all is transient, limited, fragmentary, plural, ignorant, exposed to disharmony and suffering, seeking vaguely for some unrealized yet inherent harmony of oneness, unconscious or half conscious, or even when most conscious, still tied to the original ignorance and inconscience. So one has to alternate between these two poles of one's being. On one side, tied to the ignorance and inconscience, the whole manifest world where things are transient, limited, fragmentary, plural, ignorant, exposed to disharmony and suffering, seeking vaguely for some unrealized yet inherent harmony of oneness. That's when we look at the world and life that is unfolding, there is a seeking that is happening in nature. And that seeking become conscious in human being. And this seeking is vaguely seeking vaguely for some unrealized yet inherent harmony of oneness. That harmony of oneness. In the world there are discords. It is not harmony. To arrive at the harmony of oneness, there is a seeking, a vague seeking, but it is unrealized. Unconscious or half conscious, or even when most conscious, still tied to the original ignorance and inconscience. So this material world is steeped in ignorance, and its very nature is of inconscience. And we find ourselves on this extreme and then swinging into the other extreme. Let's read the two lines together. And yet there is not only in him or before him this eternal self-aware existence, this spiritual consciousness, this infinity of self-illumined force, this timeless and endless beatitude. There is too constant also to his experience, this universe in measurable space and time, some kind perhaps of boundless infinite, and in it all is transient, limited, fragmentary, plural, ignorant, exposed to disharmony and suffering, seeking vaguely for some unrealized yet inherent harmony of oneness, unconscious or half conscious, or even when most conscious, still tied to the original ignorance and inconscience. So the existence of the other pole is tied to ignorance and inconscience. He is not always in a trance of peace or bliss. So usually these higher states are accessible in the states of trance. He is not always in a trance of peace or bliss. And even if he were, it would be no solution. For he knows that this world would still be going on outside him, and yet within some larger self of him, as if forever. So on one hand, one can plunge into a trance state and experience that inner bliss and peace. But then you would still know that outside there is this world of suffering, world of discord. He knows that this would still be going on outside him, and yet within some large self of him, as if forever. In his larger self, still that discord, the world of discord, of manifest reality, continues. That one has to accept. At times, these two states of his spirit seem to exist for him alternatively. So you tend to alternate between these two. In the manifest world, bound by the ignorance and inconscience, with all its limitations. And then you swing to the other pole, where you are submerged in the peace and bliss of a self that is free from all this and beyond this world. So at times these two states of his spirit seem to exist for him alternatively according to his state of consciousness. At others, they are there as two parts of his being, disparate and to be reconciled, two halves, an upper and a lower, or an inner and an outer half of his existence. So the life of a yogin splits into these two halves. One upper half, which is timeless, eternal, formless, peace and blissful existence. And here on the lower half is the world of forms, manifestation, discords, disharmony, transience, bound by ignorance and inconscience. So it can be split in this upper half and lower half, or inner and outer. So as you plunge deep into the inner space, you arrive at the formless infinity, timeless infinity, its peace and bliss. And when you come out, there is this outer world of manifest, transient, ignorant world of discord, disharmony. So that's what happens to the life of a yogin. It splits into these two worlds that are not yet reconciled. At times, these two states of his spirit seem to exist for him alternatively according to his state of consciousness. At others, they are there as two parts of his being, disparate and to be reconciled, two halves, an upper and a lower, or an inner and an outer half of his existence. He finds soon that this separation in his consciousness has an immense liberative power. Liberative power. This power is what has been traditionally utilized. The liberation. Those who sought liberation utilize this power of separation between these two aspects. He finds soon that this separation in his consciousness has an immense liberative power, for by it he is no longer bound to the ignorance, the inconscience. It no longer appears to him the very nature of himself and things, but an illusion which can be overcome, or at least a temporary wrong self-experience, Maya. So when this separation is leveraged for the purpose of liberation into the formless, then comes this, it no longer appears to him the very nature of himself and things, this world of inconscience, world of ignorance. It no longer appears to him the very nature of himself and things, but an illusion which can be overcome, or at least a temporary wrong self-experience, Maya. So this world gets classified as a temporary world experience, an illusion which he can actually overcome and retreat into the uncreated, timeless self. He finds soon that this separation in his consciousness has an immense liberative power, for by it he is no longer bound to the ignorance, the inconscience. It no longer appears to him the very nature of himself and things, but an illusion which can be overcome, or at least a temporary wrong self-experience, Maya. It is tempting to regard it as only a contradiction of the divine. Maya can be tempted, or the yogin may be tempted to describe Maya as a contradiction of the divine. It is tempting to regard it as only a contradiction of the divine, an incomprehensible mystery play, masquerade, or travesty of the infinite. And so it irresistibly seemed to his experience at times. On one side, the luminous verity of Brahman. On the other, a dark illusion of Maya. Now, this is the popular notion that is held in India, the Brahman and Maya. And there had been so many attempts to explain Maya, and none of the explanations eventually satisfies, other than it saying it's a mystery play, masquerade, travesty of the infinite. One side there is Brahman, other side there is inexplainable Maya. But something in him will not allow him to cut existence thus permanently in two, and looking more closely, he discovers that in this half light or darkness too is the eternal. It is the Brahman who is here with his face of Maya. So something in the yogin will not allow him to cut existence thus permanently in two. So there is something in is still saying these two opposing non-reconcilable parts, it cannot be the two irreconcilable parts. There must be a connection. There must be something. Looking more closely, he discovers that in this half-light or darkness, that is the manifest world, half-light or darkness too is the eternal. There is the eternal in it. It is the Brahman who is here with his face of Maya. There is Brahman here in this world with the face of Maya. So that's the experience towards which the seeker would move. Or some would settle. Only Brahman is real. This manifest world is unreal. But those who feel there is something that is connecting the two, and when you plunge into this world of forms, into the manifestation, you will discover Brahman there, and Brahman who is here with the face of Maya. That is a possible experience to which one can arrive at. It is in the Vedantic schools we find the words Brahman and Maya. Often reconcilable, non-reconcilable terms. Maya as an illusion and Brahman as the absolute truth, the absolute existence, one and the only existence, and Maya as illusion that veils or unveils Brahman. And the opposition between the world, the material world, and the spiritual reality had been a challenge in various schools, the way they attempt to reconcile it, explain it away, find a meaningful explanation to the phenomena of this experience of this world, its significance. We have a wide range of schools, philosophies, trying to resolve this problem. And on one extreme is the view that Brahman alone is real, the Maya, the manifest world, is unreal. Then there is a whole spectrum of attempts to bridge the two. So what Aurobindo is pointing at is when we settle in that poise of that timeless, eternal self and embrace this world, eventually behind all the forms, Maya would reveal itself as the very face of Brahman. Now, that is a door opening to a greater reconciliation. So, this is the beginning of a growing spiritual experience which reveals to him more and more that what seemed to him dark, incomprehensible Maya was all the time no other than the consciousness-Puissance of the eternal. The power, the great creative power of the eternal. That is what Maya is. What initially appeared to be dark and incomprehensible, Maya would reveal itself as the great creative power of the eternal. So this is the beginning of a growing spiritual experience which reveals to him more and more that what seemed to him dark, incomprehensible Maya was all the time no other than the consciousness-Puissance of the eternal, timeless and illimitable beyond the universe, but spread out here under the mask of a bright and dark opposites. So within Maya, the way it lays out, there is a bright and dark opposite. For the miracle of the slow manifestation of the divine in mind and life and matter. There is a slow manifestation of the divine in the world. And the world has three worlds. World of mind, world of life, world of matter. It is also referred in Sanskrit as Tripura, three worlds. Manomayam, Pranamayam, Annamayam. So there is also the notion of the Tripura Sundari, the beautiful one who presides over these triple worlds. And each world has its light and darkness. Mind goes through its right and wrong. Our Pranamaya, Deha, or the Pranamaya world, Loka, that too has its attraction, repulsions, likings, dislikings, pain, pleasure, all that. And the world of matter with its pure darkness and light, lightness, heaviness. All that dualities is part of the play of the Maya. But it is a process through which there is a progressive manifestation of the divine unfolding. The Brahman, beyond time and space, finds its expression in time and space in this triple world of mind, life, and matter through the dualities and progressively revealing, transforming that nature. So this is the beginning of a growing spiritual experience which reveals to him more and more that what seemed to him dark, incomprehensible Maya was all the time no other than the consciousness-Puissance of the eternal, timeless and illimitable beyond the universe, but spread out here under a mask of bright and dark opposites for the miracle of the slow manifestation of the divine in mind, life, and matter. All the timeless presses towards the play in time. It's a beautiful image. The timeless pressing towards the play in time. All in time turns upon and around the timeless spirit. So remember the two currents Sri Aurobindo referred. So on one hand, from the timeless, there is a pouring down into time. And from time, there is turning up an ascension into the spirit. These are the two currents that are uniting the two poles of one being. So all the timeless presses towards the play in time, and all in time turns upon and around the timeless spirit. If the separate experience was liberative, this unity experience is dynamic and effective. So the two poles of our being, they can be separated or united. When it is separated, then the experience is liberation. The spirit liberates from the entanglement with the material world and life here. Spirit disentangles itself and frees itself up, liberates. That is the separative experience. And in that separation, at one extreme perspective, the world would appear to be illusion, Maya. Now, when it comes to the unitive experience, when you see that the manifest world and the spirit are just two poles of one being, and when we bring the union of the two, when we discover the Brahman in the manifest world as the creative force of Brahman, creative power of Brahman, where there is a progressive manifestation of the divine unfolding in time through the dualities in the triple world of mind, life, and matter. When that integration takes place, that is when the unitive experience emerges, which is dynamic and effective. Dynamic in terms of there is this manifest world and the possibility of a creative action, an effective action in the world. Otherwise, one can have a liberation into the timeless, uncreated, eternal self, but without any dynamic power to intervene into the world of manifestation and its operations, its rhythms, its processes. Whereas in unitive experience, it is embracing a dynamic possibility of engaging with the world processes, world energies, the manifestation, and be effective in that unfolding. If the separative experience was liberative, this unitive experience is dynamic and effective. Unitive experience is when you embrace the material, the manifestation, and discover the face of Brahman as the Maya that is creating the worlds and progressively manifesting the divine. For he now not only feels himself to be in his soul substance part of the eternal, in his essential self and spirit entirely one with the eternal, but in his active nature an instrumentation of its omniscient and omnipotent consciousness-Puissance. So on one side is the essential self. So you are poised in that essential self, but you are also embracing this dynamic side, the active side of our being, all our mind, life, and bodily existence, instrumentation, active nature, and instrumentation of its omniscient and omnipotent consciousness-Puissance. So that essential self, the eternal self, it has instrumentation through which it is acting in the world. So our active parts are instrumentation of this omniscient and omnipotent consciousness-Puissance, the great power of consciousness, which is omniscient and omnipotent, and it becomes dynamic and effective in the world. For he now not only feels himself to be in his soul substance part of the eternal, in his essential self and spirit entirely one with the eternal, but in his active nature an instrumentation of its omniscient, and omnipotent consciousness-Puissance. However bounded and relative its present play in him, he can open to a greater and greater consciousness and power of it. And to that expansion, there seems to be no assignable limit. So this is a very, very important concept to understand, because we come across in India various schools of spiritual journey declaring that once you are liberated, and that liberation is equated with one of those three fundamental experiences. Once you are liberated, there is nothing to do. There is no more further experiences to arrive at. And there is nothing more in terms of evolution. Whereas when we reconcile the dynamic world and the eternal, in that unity of experience comes this possibility. However bound and relative its present play in him, that is, that essential self, the eternal self, no matter how much it is bound within this instrumental framework through which it is acting in the world, once you open to the dynamic power of it, dynamic and effective force of its great creative force, then he can open to a greater and greater consciousness and power of it. And to that expansion, there seems to be no assignable limit. To what degree this instrumentation can open up to the great creative force of the Brahman, there is no limit to it. That is the evolutionary possibility that opens up. Otherwise, we might arrive at the essential self-experience, will not embrace the dynamic side, and conclude that I have arrived, I am done with birth and death, world is done with, I have completed my evolutionary trajectory. But when we open to that integral approach, then opens up the possibility of the dynamic and effective action in the world, where your nature become an instrumental channel through which the creative Brahman can flow through and be effective in the world, and there is no end to what degree you can open. It is infinite. To that expansion, there seems to be no assignable limit. However bound and relative its present play in him, he can open to a greater and greater consciousness and power of it. And to that expansion, there seems to be no assignable limit. A level spiritual and supramental of that consciousness-Puissance seems even to reveal itself above him. A level spiritual and supramental. This is a key theme of Sri Aurobindo's integral yoga, the supramental range of consciousness that will become accessible when we enter into the unitive approach. When the two poles are united, two currents are united, the current from above pouring down into the lower nature, and the ascension from the lower nature to the higher. In that ascension, there is the discovery of the supramental range of consciousness. A level spiritual and supramental of that consciousness-Puissance seems even to reveal itself above him and lean to enter into contact where there are not these trammels and limits. So the supramental consciousness is leaning forward to enter into manifestation, where it removes all the trammels and limitations. And its powers too are pressing upon the play in time. So the supramental powers are seeking to find its expression in the play of time, with the promise of a greater descent and a less disguised or no longer disguised manifestation of the eternal. The eternal self is veiled here in the material life, material existence. It's disfigured, veiled, covered. And as the evolution proceeds, it is finding its finer and more perfect expression in this material existence. So with the arrival of the supramental force, it would remove the veils, and instead of indirectly operating, it will begin to operate directly in the material existence, turning life into life divine. That is the possibility Aurobindo was bringing in, which he is briefly touching upon here. A level spiritual and supramental of that consciousness-Puissance seems even to reveal itself above him. And this is what actually he discovered when he settled in nirvanic experience. And afterwards, beyond nirvana, he discovered the immanent divine, that is the divinity behind all the forms. And then the ascension. So there he discovered, revealed itself above him, the supramental consciousness. And that consciousness leaned to enter into contact where there are not these trammels and limits. And its powers too are pressing upon play in time. So he saw that the supramental force, supramental light, they were pressing upon the nature in time to flow into manifestation. That is how eventually he declared that the supramental manifestation is inevitable on earth, and the crisis that is unfolding on earth is a crisis of this manifestation, and it was to descend in time. Its powers too are pressing upon the play in time with the promise of a greater descent. Promise of a greater descent. That is what currently we are going through, what Mother has established in her work of that supramental descent, for which Mother and Sri Aurobindo worked in 1956. The greater descent happened, and that force is operationalized on earth, causing tremendous progressive transformation unfolding on earth. So that's the entire work behind this cryptic statement we see here. Sri Aurobindo wrote this way back long ago, before that descent took place. With the promise of a greater descent and a less disguised or no longer disguised manifestation of the eternal. So the future is that the divinity will reveal itself. It will not remain disguised, or it will no longer be disguised. It will reveal itself on earth. The eternal will be flowering here in the material field. The once conflicting but now bion duality of Brahman Maya stands revealed to him as the first great dynamic aspect of the self, of all selves, the master of existence, the Lord of the world sacrifice, and of his sacrifice. So in that triple fundamental realizations, one of the realizations lead to this experience of Brahman-Maya duality, in which one can have a separative approach where you reject the Maya as an illusion, you liberate yourself, or you go for the unity of experience where Maya would reveal itself as the great creative power of Brahman, and discover the greater powers above that is leaning to manifest on earth. And Brahman Maya, the duality, instead of being in conflict, in opposition, would present themselves to be complementary. A biune duality stands revealed to him as the first great dynamic aspect of the self. This is a powerful, dynamic aspect of the self of all selves. We are individuals, having individual self. Now, there is self of all selves. That self has this biune aspect, Brahman and Maya. When they come together in their unitive dimension, unitive process, that's where the great possibilities open up. And there we recognize the master of existence, the Lord of the world sacrifice, and of his sacrifice. So this is the first duality Sri Aurobindo is bringing and showing the reconciliation through that Vedantic framework, where Brahman and Maya are not in opposition, they are complementary, and there is an evolutionary process happening, and through that, supramental manifestation is in the process of unfolding here. So there is no more the need for this separation between Brahman and Maya. The once conflicting, but now biune duality of Brahman Maya. Brahman Maya with a hyphen connecting the two. It's one being, two poles of one being united. Therefore, it becomes dynamic. One being having two poles, pure consciousness and its dynamic creative force, Chit Shakti. They are coming together. Here, in the Vedantic terms, it's Brahman Maya. The once conflicting but now biune duality of Brahman Maya stands revealed to him. So we have to discover that. Instead of renouncing the world as an illusion, we have to discover the unity of Brahman and Maya. Stands revealed to him as the first great dynamic aspect of the self. This is the first great dynamic aspect of the self. Self of all selves, the master of existence, the Lord of the world sacrifice, and of his sacrifice. So this is in the context of this chapter, the sacrifice, the triune path, and the Lord of the sacrifice. In the triune path, here is the first duality, Brahman and Maya. We find in the path of jnana, path of knowledge, this duality is brought in, and that can be integrated, synthesized. Then it becomes dynamic power and the possibility of discovering greater consciousness-Puissance, the creative power of consciousness, that would become operational when the two come together in a unity of experience where the two currents, the descending current and the ascending current coming together in the creative process, manifesting the world, unfolding the evolution, moving towards greater and greater unveiling of the divine in the world. So here is the first duality, Brahman and Maya. With that, we come to the end of this episode. Thank you for being with me in this journey. Please do subscribe if you have not subscribed yet to this channel, as well as to our mailing list, so that you can get latest updates from our community. See you next week.